What if the deadliest room in a medieval castle wasn't the dungeon, the battlefield, or the siege line, but the kitchen? More people died there than from swords or torture racks combined, and the cruelest part is that it was also the only warm, comfortable place in an entire freezing stone fortress. It was medieval Florida, hot, humid, and terrifyingly flammable, a room that offered life-giving heat and food while slowly destroying everyone who worked inside it. For centuries, lords insisted their kitchens stay close to the Great Hall, right inside the main keep, purely for convenience. They wanted hot food delivered fast, and servants wanted to avoid freezing while carrying trays across icy courtyards. But that convenience carried catastrophic risk. One stray ember, one overturned oil lamp, one gust of wind through a doorway, and the castle's greatest enemy wasn't outside its walls at all. At Coucy Castle in northern France, one of the most formidable fortresses of the 13th century, repeated fires exposed exactly this danger, as open hearths, massive timber framing, and mountains of stored firewood turned the kitchen into a powder keg. Similar disasters forced changes at other strongholds, including Bodiam Castle in Sussex, England, where builders eventually pushed kitchens away from the living quarters entirely, moving them into separate buildings in the outer bailey or isolated wings connected only by covered walkways, built with thick stone walls and as little wood as possible. Nobles who once demanded hot food at a moment's notice now accepted lukewarm meals rather than risk burning to death in their sleep. Yet even banished to the edges of the castle, the danger simply changed shape. Step into one of these kitchens and the first thing you notice is the heat. A heavy, searing wall of it, centered on a massive stone and iron hearth large enough for a grown man to stand inside. Wide and deep enough to roast an entire ox on a single iron spit, this fire never went out. It burned 24 hours a day, every day of the year, and keeping it fed demanded serious logistics. Castle records and archaeological evidence show that a large household could burn through 1 to 2 tons of seasoned oak, beech, and ash daily, with teams of servants working rotating shifts just to keep the supply moving. If the fire dropped too low, the immediate crisis wasn't starvation. It was the total collapse of daily castle life. No hot food, no bread, no boiled water, no way to prepare the salted and preserved stores that kept everyone fed through winter. Picture the scene at 3 in the morning. The head cook wiping sweat from his brow while 2 young boys, often between the ages of 10 and 14, strain against a massive iron crank turning a spit loaded with 50 pounds or more of meat. They worked shifts of 10 to 14 hours, leaning their entire small frames into the crank as fat dripped and flared with sharp hisses, sending sparks showering outward whenever a log shifted. The temperature around these hearths regularly climbed past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Nearby, other servants hauled massive bronze and iron cauldrons of boiling water, stew, or oil. One slip, one loose grip, and hundreds of pounds of scalding liquid could come crashing down. The medical consequences were relentless and permanent. Prolonged exposure to radiant heat and open flame could cause temporary or even permanent eye damage, a condition also documented among medieval glassmakers and blacksmiths, caused by cumulative infrared exposure. Sudden flares from dripping fat hitting hot coals through burning grease outward like miniature explosions across arms, faces, and chests, and severe burns were so common that most career cooks carried lifelong scars. With no antibiotics and no understanding of infection, even a moderate burn treated with animal grease or unsterilized herbs could turn septic, and victims might linger for days or weeks before dying of blood poisoning. These weren't rare accidents, they were simply routine occupational hazards, and the flames weren't even the most dangerous part. The greater killer was invisible. Thick, constant wood smoke that filled the room hour after hour with almost no real ventilation beyond a few high windows or roof vents. Walls turned pitch black with greasy soot, filthy, and also highly flammable, since a single spark hitting a sooty wall could trigger a flash fire in seconds. Workers tied wet rags over their mouths and noses, which did little beyond keeping them alive long enough to finish a shift. Modern forensic archaeology has confirmed the scale of the damage. Skeletal remains of medieval kitchen staff show heavy carbon deposits inside the rib cages and facial sinuses, indicating lung damage. Researchers compare to smoking roughly 40 cigarettes a day for decades. The unusually high ceilings we now admire as elegant medieval architecture were often, in kitchens, a purely practical survival measure, built taller simply to give smoke somewhere to rise above the heads of the people working below. All of this effort fed to completely separate worlds from the very same hearth. On one side of the kitchen, servants prepared a whole peacock, plucked, roasted, and carefully redressed in its own feathers to look alive on the platter, seasoned with imported saffron, ginger, cinnamon, and grains of paradise, spices that cost more than their weight in gold, used not to disguise spoiled meat, as popular myth suggests, but purely to display wealth. A few feet away, in the same soot-blackened room, cooks stirred a simple pottage of barley, dried peas, and whatever scraps of meat the nobles hadn't claimed in a smaller cauldron at the edge of the same fire. Fine white manchet bread went to the high table. Coarse dark rye or barley bread went to everyone else, and your bread told everyone exactly where you stood in the social order and roughly how long you were likely to live. Both meals were cooked in the identical toxic air, by people equally exposed to the same flying grease and the same burns, whether they were preparing a priceless spiced bird or a pot of peas. Feeding both tables required an endless supply of water, hauled by the youngest and lowest-ranking servants in heavy wooden buckets across stone floors already slick with grease, fat, and ash, floors that turned into skating rinks with every spill. The well water itself was often contaminated by runoff from nearby latrines and animal pens, requiring repeated boiling just to make it marginally safer. Around all this stood the tools of the trade, cleavers heavy enough to hack through bone, red-hot cauldrons swinging on chains, spits heavy enough to impale an entire deer. One frayed rope or one tired arm, and catastrophe followed instantly. A boy exhausted from hours of hauling water slipping on greasy stone, a cauldron tipping, boiling liquid cascading over his body, his skin blistering in a world with no burn units and no antibiotics. And yet, despite all of it, the kitchen remained the one genuinely warm place in an otherwise freezing stone fortress. As night fell and the rest of the castle turned bitterly cold, off-duty soldiers, stewards, and huntsmen would drift toward the glowing hearth like moths to a flame, huddling on low benches, sharing weak ale or leftover pottage, the rigid hierarchy of the castle softening slightly as a senior guard sat beside a turnspit boy, both silently grateful for the same heat. But the danger never actually left the room. Sparks still lapped. The same slick floor remained treacherous in the dim light, and the same fire that gave them comfort was quietly scarring their lungs and shortening their lives with every hour they sat beside it. The medieval kitchen was the ultimate paradox, the single most vital room in the entire castle, and also its deadliest. It powered the social hierarchy, fed the feasts that displayed the lord's wealth, and offered the only real physical comfort inside a home that otherwise felt like a tomb of cold stone, while slowly killing the very people who kept it running. The nobility got the glory and the spiced peacock. The cooks and servants who made it possible got scorched lungs, burned skin, and early graves, leaving behind no statues and no chronicles, only blackened rib cages and forgotten graves and generations of invisible labor that quietly kept the entire medieval world fed and warm.